David Brooks. Welcome, gentlemen. So as we just heard, PBS, the NewsHour, focusing all this week on gun violence, on mental illness, and we just saw that report from Chicago on an effort to work with students. David, it really does, again, come down to what can be done about it. And in the middle of all this, people are still looking to Washington, gun control laws. Where does it stand right now?
Yeah, I'd say if one has realistic expectations for the political system, the news is reasonably good. You know, obviously it's a very polarizing issue, but I do think the sides are trying to find some sort of progress that can be made. And so if you look at the stuff that's likely to get through the system, we're likely to have some background checks. We're likely to have or at least possible to have some magazine controls. There's a lot of talk insurance, liability insurance for gun owners. That's more a state thing. There's also more prosecutorial things that is being talked about and proposed, making it hard for felons to get guns, controlling some of the transfers, youthful offenders. So these are not huge things, probably not assault weapons ban, but a series of small things to make the friction of gun ownership more difficult. I still have to say, though, and I've said this a lot, that when you look at some of the acts of gun violence, people shot in Chicago, often it's handguns. And there's really very little being done on some of the, what really is the heart of the problem.
Can something be done about that?
First of all, let me just say that PBS deserves credit. I just hope that the other networks would emulate and compete. I mean, it's been a really important week, I think. And I think there has been this time an effort, a real effort, to sustain the sense of hurt, outrage, and loss of Newtown. Slate magazine has a running total of the number of people who have been victims of gun violence since December 14th in Newtown, now at 2,124 since then. And I think the efforts of those in positions of leadership, Vice President Biden in particular, I agree with David. I think there's a chance. I think we'll get universal background check.
You do?
I do. I do believe that. I think that, first of all, Judy, most encouraging thing is nobody's going to filibuster this. We're going to have votes. I think you'd be in a position politically that would be indefensible not to have votes up or down. I think both sides really. I think the president put that very well in the State of the Union.
One of the key House committee chairs said today that he was going to...
That's right, Congressman Goodlatte, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, who is himself not an advocate of gun control. But I think limiting the size of the magazine, and I think as well that there's a real chance for tougher penalties against straw buyers, who are one of the real problems in guns that Virginia has led this. That's right, exactly. So I think the most encouraging to me is we're focused on achievable goals. I'm hopeful on the assault weapon ban. I really am. I'm more encouraged than I have been in the past.
Hopeful on the assault weapon ban? Where do you see?
No, I don't think so. I think that would be too heavy a lift. I think there's a lot of opposition to that.
But on background checks?
Yeah, I think that. And you can see they're doing a good job. The administration, I would say, is doing a good job. First, every time they talk about guns, they praise hunters, they talk about Second Amendment rights, and they've taken it out of what had become, which is a cultural issue, urban versus rural, more or less, and they've sort of tamped that down, focused on the practical. I wish, actually, they take that approach in some other spheres of our politics.
But you're saying, you both are saying, you think the administration, that there's at least a conversation going that could lead to legislation.
I do. Yeah. I think we'll get votes in the Congress, which in the past has been a problem.
And it should be emphasized, though, that social policy has its limits. There's just not much history of gun violence or gun control limiting crime. It can limit suicide, but limiting some of the violence is just not a great record. And that's like a lot of social policy. You can have modest progress, but you can't have something transformational. I would think to get the transformational effects like in those Chicago schools, you have to much broader social policy, families, poverty, all the stuff we talk about.
I agree, but that was a good part of that discussion was about impulse control and dealing with that. And those impulses are easy to control if there aren't firearms near proximate to there.
Well, the terrible word, sequester. I don't know who chose the word, but a week from today, Mark, we are going to see the beginning, unless something changes between now and then, of automatic, across-the-board federal spending cuts, $85 billion worth. Do you see anything happening between now and then to stop this from, at least the clock from ticking?
No, I sure don't, Judy. I mean, Grantland Rice, the great American sports writer, said when the great scorer comes to write beside your name, he writes not whether you won or lost, but how you played the game. It's been changed to, he writes not whether you won or lost, but who gets the blame. I mean, that's what we're into now in Washington. I mean, if this were really serious and a matter of national urgency and emergency, last weekend would not have been spent golfing in Florida and the Congress out of session. I mean, there would have been meeting, there would have been, in serious negotiations. And I think the Democrats playing the fact that the president has a political advantage. He's seen as the more responsible of the two parties. The Republicans are very much on the defensive. But I don't see, in answer to your question, I don't see a resolution or a solution.
You see anything, any movement?
No, there were a couple of phone calls yesterday, but that's about it, just phone calls. I certainly don't see any movement. As Mark said, the polls show the Democrats will probably profit. The Republicans still feel trapped, though. They feel they gave up a big tax increase a couple of weeks ago, and they can't give up another. And that's sort of the asking price, and so they feel they've got to show they can cut spending. I personally think the likely loser in this is the Republicans. They're less popular. They're associated with government, controlling government spending, and they've basically got a problem. I think they need to show the American people that we like some government programs, we don't like others. They need to be able to distinguish between the two. Unfortunately, when they embrace this, they're embracing a piece of legislation that makes no distinction between good government and bad government. It just cuts randomly across the board, and worse, doesn't even cut the things that actually create the debt problem, which is the entitlement programs. So to me, this is both a substantive and political serious problem for Republicans.
So are you saying they're going to have to move off of their position where right now no revenue increases?
The Republicans have been doing this since 1995, since the government shutdown. They make a big show. They tell themselves we're going to control spending. They do something sort of ham-fisted, and when the public reaction, then they cave in and they come with concessions. So it's not like we haven't been here before. I just wish they had a little smarter strategy. If I could give them one piece of advice is don't worry about discretionary spending. When you're talking about cutting government, domestic discretionary spending, which is stuff for the National Institutes of Health and TSA, that's small potatoes. They're always focused on that, which is sort of the sympathetic popular stuff. Focus on the entitlement programs, but they're off doing the wrong thing, in my view.
You're going to disagree with him?
I have to disagree with David. That's in the contract. No, I think the Republicans, you can see where they are. They're very much behind the political 8-ball, and they're now saying, they're reduced to saying, well, the cuts aren't going to be that serious. The Democrats are exaggerating them, and even though they've warned about these cuts were terrible in defense, now they're not going to be that serious. And then now it was also the president's idea to begin with. I mean, that seems to be their fallback position.
But we're hearing today about the air traffic controller.
Yeah, no, that's Secretary LaHood was out there.
Inspection.
Yes, no, that has been obviously the administration's position, that this is going to be very serious. It's going to inconvenience people, and it's going to inconvenience travelers, and there's a potential threat to the economy. 800,000 jobs has been predicted as a loss by Congressional Budget Office. I mean, we're talking about serious implications and a downside. But I don't see, Judy. I mean, I recall in 1990 when George H.W. Bush was president, and we went to Andrews Air Force Base for 5 weeks with the leadership of the Congress and the leadership of the White House, and Dick Darman and John Sununu, and who was chief of staff for President Bush, and the president was involved, and Bob Dole, and it was just really a major thing. I don't see anything approaching that sense of urgency, engagement, or involvement at this point.
Why not?
Why not? I think in the Democrats, I think the president feels that he's got the upper hand, the advantage on it. I think that his position is stronger. It's more popular. He thinks it's more defensible, and most people would agree with him. And he's got the Republicans very much if not at his mercy, then certainly at a disadvantage.
They both like it secretly. The Democrats, it's going to be probably a political win. I think, they're mixed. Listen, they know substantively it's a disaster. Sequestration was designed to be stupid, so it wouldn't happen. And it succeeds magnificently being stupid. It's really stupid policy.
It was.
It's a political win for the Democrats, so that's a sort of a silver lining. And for Republicans, they can show people who sort of think they're weak. Hey, we're tough, we're cutting government. And so if you look at the conservative press, not all the Weekly Standard, some others have said this is a bad idea, but others have said, you know, we're going to cut spending. Let's learn to love it.
So just a matter of time.
Well, and you know, it was intended as a nuclear option. I mean, that, you know, it was so irresponsible and so indefensible that it would never come to pass. And on the 1st of March, it will come to pass.
Okay, less than 2 minutes, but I want to bring up immigration reform, another big subject out there. Last weekend, there was information about the administration's proposal on immigration. It was, Republicans say the administration, David, leaked it on purpose. Democrats say they didn't. I mean, what do you see happening on immigration? Just
yeah, I'd say this is more like the gun issue than sequestration. So people are behaving reasonably well. So that leak came out, people sort of put it aside and said the Senate is still working. The members on both sides of the issue are working constructively together. Even labor unions and the chamber and the business groups are sort of working together. So I'd say there's significant, steady forward progress toward a bill that would provide a path to citizenship, that would get us the high-skilled workers. I still think this is marching along reasonably well.
What do you see?
Yeah, some Republicans, led by Ted Cruz, the junior senator from Texas, charged that this was an attempt by the White House to sabotage the immigration bill in hopes that it would be a political advantage for the Democrats in 2014 and 2016. You know, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think it's in both parties' interests. I think it's in the president's legacy to resolve the immigration, to pass a significant historic statute. I think it's in the Republicans' interest to pass a law that it at least enables them then to start to compete and campaign for Hispanic votes in the future.
But both of you see some movement here. All right. Well, we hate to ask you to move off the set, but it is the end of our time. David Brooks, Mark Shields, thank you. And Mark and David, keep up.